The National Planning Commission, a group of independent advisors to the presidency, believes we need to declare an energy emergency. The past 2 weeks have been particularly brutal, with stage 6 load shedding at times and a wage deadlock at Eskom. And even though the wage dispute has been settled, it seems Eskom is still battling to quickly reduce those levels of load shedding. We're still on stage 5 this evening. We're meant to be reduced to level 2 by Friday, but we've been told we'll still stay on level 4. So let's get a deeper understanding of what the National Planning Commission believes could bring an end to load shedding. I'm joined now by NPC member Professor Mark Swilling. He's a distinguished professor of sustainable development at Stellenbosch University. Prof, thank you so much for joining us. Listening to Govan's package, it's clear that there are certain groups who feel that our political heads have failed us. Is it important to point a finger of blame, perhaps at someone like Gwede Mantashe or even Pravin Gordhan or even at Eskom itself, and say, there's the problem, that's why we're in the pickle we are?
Sally, I think that's too simplistic. It makes the assumption that it's a crisis that has been caused by political decisions that are being made in the current moment. This crisis has very, very deep roots. We've had load shedding since 2008. We had recommendations for new capacity going back to the late 1990s, which were not followed through. So I think we need to accept that we're dealing with a complex system, which is under severe strain and pressure, and it's not going to simply be fixed by firing a minister or two or the CEO of Eskom. That is really simplifying the problem in a way that is not going to be at all helpful in solving the fundamental problem now, which in the short term is to end load shedding in 24 months. And that's what the NPC is focused on.
And you want to see an energy emergency declared. And that's not just to quantify the problem. It would trigger a whole lot of things. Just talk me through why this is important.
Well, there was a statement that came out of the presidency, which the NPC has welcomed, which is that the president is taking the lead in ending load shedding and dealing with the crisis. And that was welcomed by us. We also welcomed the work of Operation Vulindlela in being the action team that ensures implementation. But when we talk about an energy emergency, not a state of emergency, an energy emergency, what we are essentially suggesting is a framework that would give greater powers to the president for intervening in a way which could overcome some of the serious blockages, what the Minister of Public Enterprises last week referred to as damned red tape. That's some of the big problem that we have in getting as much solar onto rooftops, as many IPPs as possible, and getting municipalities into the procurement game. That is what we need. We need 10,000 megawatts of new generation capacity on the grid over and above what's already planned, plus 5,000 megawatts of storage. And that will bring load shedding to an end in 24 months. We can do it. Other countries have done it. We can do it.
OK, so what other interventions are needed? We need to cut that red tape. We need to cut through all the delays. But one of the other proposals is that you, as the NPC, believe the current 100 megawatt ceiling on these new power projects is way too low. You should just lift the lid on it. Talk me through that.
Well, it's not just a case of way too low. It's just unnecessary. I mean, if you want to build a large-scale solar wind plant of the scale of 100 megawatts, there's something called the Eskom grid code, and Eskom has to give you authorization to connect to the grid. And that is all that is required. You don't need another layer of bureaucracy at NERSA, which amounts to a registration and an approval process which delays projects. We only need one level, which is the grid code and the Eskom authorization process. We don't need a ceiling, because Eskom will tell you if you want to build 500 megawatts in Hopefield, there's not enough grid capacity there, and they'll tell you, you can, if you're prepared to do 100, then we'll give you the authorization. That's all you need. It's as simple as that.
It sounds great, because it sounds like it could happen quickly. Whose decision is it, and who might be vehemently against it? Would NERSA have a problem, for example?
NERSA may have a problem. I mean, what we have is, what we need to understand, Sally, is we have a set of rules of the game for managing the energy sector, which is perfect for a normal situation. But we don't have a normal situation. Let's get rid of load shedding and then go back to our rules with all the checks and balances and the multiple decision-making points that we have in the system at the moment. But we can't afford the slow pace because of the multiple decision-making points and because of these duplicating regulatory procedures. That is the kind of powers that the president needs to slice through the problem, clear the way so that we can unlock the large number of shovel-ready projects which can be financed without increasing the burden on the state. We just need to let it happen.
Whose decision is it? Cabinet?
Well, again, we have a complex system here. So that's why when we talk about an energy emergency, it's about making sure that the president in particular has the powers to override existing regulations, which are going to take too long to repeal or change or reform through parliament or get new regulations. We don't have the time for that. So I think the key decision is the cabinet decision to decide, yes, we need an energy emergency. Yes, certain special powers are required, and then those are implemented. I don't think it's going to work to have a kind of slow, complex political process to reach consensus amongst all the political decision makers that this is what we need to do. That is also going to take too long. I think what we need to do is just have decisive action to intervene to deal with these blockages.
You know, I don't think anyone's going to argue that we do have a massive emergency in energy. But when you start talking about we've got to change the rules and we've got to be more efficient, it just reminds me of COVID, where everyone jumped in because there was a global pandemic, corners were cut, corruption crept in, and we had a massive problem on our hands. How do we make sure, if this energy emergency is declared, that we don't cut corners to such an extent that in cutting the red tape, we don't cut open a hole for corruption to creep in?
You're absolutely right. That is probably the biggest threat to this basic recommendation that the Planning Commission are putting forward. However, and I think you're also right in pointing out that at the beginning of the pandemic, we did make these decisions to intervene in irregular ways in order to do what needed to be done. And you're right. We had that kind of corruption. But I think what we have in the energy sector now is a body of expertise that will make it possible to set up some kind of watchdog that can keep an eye on what is happening. At the same time, we must also recognize that in the renewable sector, there's been very little corruption. The large number of projects have come in on time, on budget, and are putting electrons onto the grid, and there's virtually no scandals. So I think it's a sector that at this stage anyway is a sector that will make it possible to generate a large amount of funding, not much of which is going to come from the state, unlike in the pandemic.
What happens if we just carry on at the pace we're at? Where do you see us ending up?
If we carry on in this kind of business as usual way, stop-start, without policy certainty, without a clear line of sight of exactly where we're going, without an updated integrated resource plan, I'm afraid then load shedding is not going to be ended in 24 months. It could drag on for 2 or 3 or more years. The upside is that the minister has announced that there will be further determinations that will make it possible to procure all the renewable energy that is referred to in the IRP, 14,400 megawatts of wind and 6,000 megawatts of solar. And that's really good news, recently come out. But we need more of that. And we need the bid window 6 that is now open to be expanded to procure a lot more than what it aims to procure at the moment.
All right, so you as the advisory body, the National Planning Commission, you say we need an energy emergency. That ultimately is a cabinet decision. What needs to happen next?
Well, I think what needs to happen next is that the requisite political decision would need to be made, informed by the necessary expertise, and the National Planning Commission has got an extraordinary amount of expertise and a lot of convening power to kind of bring in some of that expertise to advise on the details of how this could work in practice. If in the next couple of weeks the necessary expertise was brought together to figure out how to do it, then I don't think there is a huge amount of danger in going that route. The alternative is pretty much too ghastly to contemplate, which is the continuation of the load shedding and possible escalation. I don't think the evidence supports what we heard earlier from a former CEO, that we can just fix the 15,000 megawatts of broken down capacity. The current CEO has said there's a lot that simply cannot be repaired. We now need to put new generation capacity on the grid, and if we don't do that, we're going to just continue to bounce along the bottom like we are now.
Well, thank you so much for talking to us tonight. We do appreciate your time.